Hi everyone. It's great to be speaking at the PyCon US Maintainer Summit. My name is Katherine Michael. My talk is called Bringing Pinax Back to Life. A little bit about me. I'm a consultant to the Wharton School. I work on a game simulation framework project called Simple. I'm a Pinax maintainer and web developer and a DEFNA board member. My talk is about Pinax. Pinax is an open source library of reusable Django starter projects, apps, and themes for building websites. When developers began building Pinax in 2007, they had fun adding to it, but eventually Pinax had grown to be around 80 projects and apps. There was not a strategy in place to make Pinax as easy as possible to maintain, so the maintainers began to suffer burnout. I was hired to work on Pinax in the fall of 2017. In my talk, I'll outline the critical problems I discovered and the solutions I've implemented to make Pinax healthier and easier to maintain. To better understand this story, we need to go back in time to 2008. Some Django enthusiasts had formed a group called the Hot Club of France, named after Django Reinhardt's band. They had found themselves reusing some of the same code patterns while building websites with Django. At the first ever DjangoCon US, James Tauber, one of the original Pinax authors, gave a talk about this new community called Pinax. James talked about his own site, Quisition. Even though it was a flashcard site, much of its functionality had nothing to do with flashcards. The Hot Club of France members had begun to abstract these patterns into reusable starter projects, apps, and themes. As web technologists, they wanted to create a reusable Django library that would make choices and compromises. This would enable them as website creators to focus on the features at the top of the stack. Then in this way, they could go from website idea to realization more quickly. Let's fast forward to 2017. It had been around 10 years since the Pinax idea had been born, and I was hired to work on Pinax. So what was the state of Pinax by now? It's quite common from the very beginning until now for people to discover Pinax and say that it's everything they've ever dreamed of. For example, on this slide is one of the very early tweets about Pinax. Someone says, Pinax is every idea I've ever had. By 2017, Pinax had grown to be a large group of professional quality, interdependent Django projects and apps. This included starter projects with Pinax apps pre-installed and a command line interface to install them. It also includes sophisticated testing packaging and continuous integration configurations. The Pinax GitHub organization alone now has around 80 repos in it. This slide includes many of the more popular ones. In addition to the GitHub organization, Pinax now has a global doc site and a Pinax Slack channel for community and support, and there are also app-specific docs and individual repos. But without a strategy in place to make Pinax as easy as possible to maintain, the maintainers had begun to suffer burnout. And by now, many of the original authors had moved on, so sustainability was lacking. The goal of my work in general has been to make things simpler and self-service. As a result, newcomers, contributors, and maintainers could help themselves, and ideally, therefore, create a culture that could sustain itself. The first problem I came upon was tribal knowledge, and the solution was to document the tribal knowledge. The Pinax authors knew how to do things quickly, but the knowledge remained in their heads. And so the barrier of entry knowledge-wise was fairly high, but the docs were sparse and not beginner-friendly. GitHub did an open source survey in 2017, and they found that documentation is highly valued, often overlooked, and a means for establishing inclusive and accessible communities. For a while, I spent my time figuring out how things were done. I started by creating a release plan that explained the Pinax way of doing things, then moved on to creating a global community health file repo filled with default files, including a code of conduct, a community plan, contributing and support information, information for maintainers, and issue and PR templates. The next problem was that the existing docs were difficult to find, duplicated, and inconsistent. And the solution was to create one source of documentation that would be easy to find and use. There were bits of documentation here and there, some forgotten and some private. Pinax has a wiki, so I organized the historical docs, links, and new release plans in the wiki, and added a blurb to the top of the repo readmes to make all of the docs more discoverable, including global docs, app-specific docs, tagged and published releases, support and contributing information, and release docs. The next problem was a variation in configurations, and the solution was to choose one configuration approach and implement it across projects. A number of people had created and worked on different Pinax projects at different times, and because of this, there was a lot of variation in terms of how things had been done. And I can tell you from personal experience as a newcomer that can make it harder to understand the code. So after some research, I chose one configuration approach and implemented it across repos and detailed this in the release plan. The next problem was a lack of engagement with individuals, and the solution was to reduce the backlog of issues and PRs and catch up with engagement. Between releases, over 160 issues were closed, 100 PRs merged, 30 PRs closed, and countless questions answered in issues in Slack. I began by resolving the lowest hanging fruit issues and PRs knowledge-wise and working my way up. And the idea was to reduce the number until the new and existing issues and PRs would be more manageable. The next problem was a lack of engagement with the community, and the solution was to write more blog posts about plans in progress and publicize them well. I started writing blog posts and tweeting about them, and the post might be about Pinax or some other Django-related activity, and I would mention Pinax. And people began to be interested in Pinax, telling me that they had heard about it through my writing. And I realized that it could have a huge benefit to stop and take time to write about the accomplishments and progress of a project and share it. Even if a handful or one person becomes interested and contributes, it can have a huge impact. The last problem was that tasks were being done manually, and the solution was to automate the tasks to lower the risk of burnout. So how's it going? In July of 2020, I oversaw the completion of an important Pinax release. Around 28 apps were included, and we notably dropped support for Python 2.7. It was a huge milestone for me personally and professionally because I was able to oversee the entire end-to-end process. But Pinax is a work in progress, and there's still room for improvement. We don't have a sense of community that we could have at the moment, but I'm happy to say that we're moving forward with a 21.05 release to update the Python Django test matrix and implement some of the automation that we didn't get to with the last release, such as running talks from GitHub Actions and implementing auto-publish to PyPI upon tagging. And the global documentation needs to be improved. So the biggest lesson I've learned in all of this that I want to impart to you is that the last release succeeded because of my communication and teaching skills, which I sort of learned by accident. When my blog posts attracted contributors, I received some help that enabled the release to be completed. It wouldn't have been done without the help of the contributors who came along. The release documentation I had written enabled people to contribute on their own with minimal help from me. So if you want more ideas about ways to make maintaining an open source project easier, I've included a slide with additional ideas in my slide deck And I just want to say that even though Pinax has been fun and frustrating, I'm personally grateful to have had the experience of working on it because I've learned a lot. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. Thank you.